Hey there. Today there is a ton of talk about what is going on between Israel and Iran. But today I want to talk to you about something a little bit different, which I think is a lot more illuminating. That is what Israel is doing to Syria. With Israel and Iran, there is some illusion of an equal conflict here. Iranian propaganda plays into that a lot, actually. Presenting this as some kind of like conflict of equals or like an actual fight. There is no fight in Syria. There is merely Israeli aggression. And I think it's important to focus on what's going on in Syria because it illustrates the true threat that Israel poses to all of its neighbors, to peace in the region and in the world, and most importantly, from my selfish perspective, the incredible threat that Israel now poses to the United States, to U.S. empire more generally. So, as I said, you can look at what's happening between Israel and Iran, and you can pretend that Iran is the aggressor somehow. You have to be some kind of like brain-rotted baby boomer who only watches U.S. cable news to believe that. You have to be completely unaware of the basic historical dynamics that I'm going to explain in this video to believe that, but you can believe that on some level. Nobody who looks at Israel's actions towards Syria over the past decade and over the past 6 or 7 months specifically can possibly say that Syria is the aggressor here. It is clearly Israel, and I think we need to focus on what's happening between Israel and Syria because that shows us what Israel actually is right now. That shows us what's really going on and can provide guidance to the United States as to what we should do on the bigger question of Israel-Iran conflict. So, what's happening in Syria? I have watched the war in Syria for its entirety. I started watching it in 2011 when everybody became aware of it, and I had a somewhat closer perspective on it because I moved to Istanbul, Turkey in 2011. Now, back in 2011, I read what everybody else did, and I believed what everybody else did. It was a heroic uprising against Assad. There are some elements of truth to that. And I was a huge, huge supporter of this sort of working against Assad. The years went on. I paid more and more attention. In 2014, I decided to be a full-time geopolitical analyst of geopolitical affairs. So I had to start paying a lot more attention, a lot deeper attention to Syria. And by the time I started making content about the Syrian conflict in 2016, I had a much more jaundiced view. It was clear to me, as is now clear to everybody who's not watching cable news, or listening to actual U.S. government sources, that the war in Syria was in large part a regime change operation by the United States. Pretty much everybody acknowledges this now. Without the United States and our allies, Turkey and the Gulf, there is no way that this war would have lasted as long as it did and would have killed 500,000 Syrians. It was a regime change operation. I've been very conscious of that, or at least that it was a proxy war between Syria's longtime allies, Iran and Russia, and the United States, who, as the revisionist power, wanted to come in there and kick out the Russians and kick out the Iranians, who had been there since at least the 1970s, and put in our own people. Like, we were the motivating force behind the Syrian civil war. I have made other videos talking about how I have grown up in a very pro-Israel context and, still have a lot of affection for the country or what have you. So throughout this period, even as I was becoming more and more jaundiced, I was like, oh, come on, it's not for Israel. You can't say we're destroying Syria for Israel. That's ridiculous. The United States has a lot of other aims in Syria, specifically the fact that we really hate Russia, that we're really angry at Syria for choosing Russia in the 1960s and 1970s. And this is just sort of really an aftermath of the Cold War thing. It's not just all about Israel and the fact that the Assad regime is opposed to Israel. That's silly. We're doing this to attack Russia. I didn't think that was a legitimate thing to do, but I thought that was what we were doing. Interestingly, in the aftermath, now our guys are in charge of Syria. They've been in charge of Syria since December 2024, and Russia still has military bases in Syria. So I guess my last illusion about the Syrian civil war has kind of been crushed. If we were truly not just destroying Syria for Israel, if we were truly, opposed to Russia, why does Russia still have bases in Syria after we won? And I have to reluctantly conclude that the horror we unleashed on Syria, the 500,000 people we killed in Syria, was mostly for Israel. That's grim. That's something the United States chose to do. I can't blame that on the Israeli people. The U.S. made these choices and did these things. What's important to focus on now is what happened after December of 2024, when our guys won. They're certainly much more directly controlled by Turkey, but we can directly control Turkey. This is the U.S. won in the Syrian civil war. The folks who took down, with a ton of Turkish and American and Gulf help, took down the Assad regime that was supposedly this big enemy of Israel for decades. Those folks took power or trying to take power still in December of 2024. Tremendously difficult project. So many armed factions, so many people in Syria who benefit from the continuation of war. Tremendously difficult, challenging project. The biggest challenge, however, is Israel. Their reaction to the overthrow of their supposedly long-term enemy, Assad, their reaction to that overthrow was to viciously attack the people who had overthrown Assad. In December and January, they destroyed most of the military equipment of the Syrian country. They destroyed Syria's navy. They destroyed Syria's air defense in a sweeping series of measures. And now they are occupying broader swaths of Syria. Israel has occupied the Golan Heights of Syria since the 1960s. There was a buffer zone, but within Syria, on top of the Golan Heights, that had been in place for decades. Israel quickly occupied that buffer zone, quickly moved beyond that buffer zone, and are basically in the suburbs of Damascus at this point, and they are rampaging through towns in southern Syria, and they are carrying out activity. This is from Charles Lister, who works for the very U.S. military-industrial complex focused Middle East Institute. They are detaining men and removing them to Israel. So they're kidnapping people. They are demolishing homes, shuttering roads, and razing forests. So what Israel is doing in Syria, run by people who overthrew supposedly their greatest enemy. And it's important to point out that for the past 6 and 7 months, this victorious rebellion army, which has a lot of weapons, could do a lot of things, has done nothing in response to 800 plus Israeli airstrikes and 250 plus ground incursions, other than complain to the UN Security Council. The Syrian government is doing nothing to fight Israel, as Israel is treating its neighboring country the same way they're treating their slave population in Gaza. They are going in, they are taking advantage of a moment of Syrian weakness to take even more Syrian territory. Supposedly, the Golan Heights, we need that. Israel needs that. That's for their defense, and this is as far as they're going to go. Well, now they've taken more territory to defend the Golan Heights, and now they're taking more territory to defend the territory that defends the Golan Heights, and they are getting very close to setting up settlements. This is what I believed before 2023 to be a anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. This is a very real attempt to set up Greater Israel, to crush all of their neighbors, to divide all of their neighbors, to take land in a very imperial fashion, in a very pre-World War II, sort of fashion of conquest and destruction. That is what Israel is actually doing here. And to explain just the enormity of this and the insanity of this, I think it's worth making some comparisons. Before we get there, let's talk just briefly about Charles Lister, whose reporting I'm using as a source here. Charles Lister is a guy who, when I was covering the U.S. effort in Syria in a critical way, is someone whose reporting and approach to the conflict I strongly disliked. I strongly disagreed with this guy. This guy works at the Middle East Institute, heavily funded by the Gulf client states of the United States, a guy who really, really hated Assad and was doing everything he could to undermine Assad. I believe that effort is more responsible for the deaths of 500,000 Syrians than the evil Assad regime itself. But this is a guy who is not opposed to U.S. interests. This is a guy who hates Iran and Hezbollah very deeply. I mean, this guy's life has been trying to overthrow Assad for the past decade. So he hates Iran. He hates Hezbollah for propping up Assad. And if this guy is pointing out that what's happening, and these are not his words, but if the details that I have provided are his, if this guy is pointing out that Israel is carrying out a campaign of conquest in Syria, this is something that is happening. This is not some, YouTube internet rumor. This is Israel rolling out a new set of colonial territories in southern Syria. This is extraordinary. And I think this is the point at which I get into territory that could get me kicked off YouTube, but I think it's worth doing, frankly, because at a certain point you've got to stand up against evil in the world and do it. It's very little to sacrifice if it costs me my YouTube channel. The direct comparison to what Israel is doing right now, and I think this is the most direct comparison to what Israel is doing right now, is 1940s Germany. It's 1940s Germany. And I think we all know what that means. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of what people are saying, or at least what I am saying when I compare Israel today to 1940s Germany. The Holocaust is a unique evil. It is the worst thing that the 1940s Germans did. It is, I believe, worse than most, really anything else in human history, certainly in modern human history. I guess you could go back to the Mongols to find something worse. When I am comparing Israel to the 1940s Germans, I am not saying that what they're doing in Gaza is comparable to the Holocaust. It is not yet comparable to the Holocaust. What Israel is doing in Gaza is the worst thing that has been done this century by anybody. You'll note that Israel superfans don't mention Sudan or Yemen so much anymore. At least the literate ones don't, because it's very clearly, obviously, almost 2 years in, so much worse than what happened in Ethiopia or Sudan or Yemen. And they certainly don't mention Syria for the reasons I just discussed. Gaza is now getting to the point where some of the estimates are closing in on the Rwanda genocide. Israel would have to initiate what they've initiated in Gaza in the West Bank to get close to the Cambodian genocide. But that's what this Israeli government wants to do. However, even if they were to get to that point, I think it would still be inappropriate to compare, even if, as I believe Israel is getting towards, they're getting to the point of getting to be worse than the only things that are comparable in the 20th century to what the 1940s Germans did. Even though they're getting closer, I think it is still inappropriate to compare what's happening in Gaza and what Israel wants to do in the West Bank to the unique horror of the Holocaust. And this is a failure of historic memory. The Holocaust is the worst thing that the Nazis did. It is not the main thing that the Nazis did that was evil. Sorry, the main thing that the 1940s Germans did that was evil. The main thing that the 1940s Germans did that was evil that enabled the Holocaust. Remember, the 1940s Germans killed many more Polish Jews than they did German Jews, many of whom had the resources necessary to flee and the warnings, knowing it was time to go. The worst thing that the 1940s Germans did was the Holocaust. But what enabled that worst thing was the main evil thing. The main evil thing that all of Europe, all the United States, the world in general decided they must do everything possible to stop is the 1940s Germans invading all of their neighbors. Invading all of their neighbors and shredding the peace of Europe for generations. The actions of the 1940s Germans to invade all their neighbors. That's what enabled the worst thing they did, the Holocaust. That's what enabled the communists to control Eastern Europe for half a century. It is that regional destruction, that invasion of all their neighbors. That is the main evil thing that the 1940s Germans did, from which everything descends. And that's just what Israel's doing. Like, that's just what Israel is doing. If we're looking for other analogs between what Israel's doing and what the 1940s Germans are doing, you look at maybe Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein invaded 2 countries over the course of a decade. Israel is maintaining wars, and wars of settlement and occupation. The term is Lebensraum. They are trying to build living space for themselves. Yes, that is a term that comes from the 1940s Germans. They are attempting to invade and settle Syria. They are attempting to, I don't think they're currently moving too forward with settling Lebanon. Hezbollah is still strong enough to keep that from happening, but they are actively trying to destroy the Lebanese government. They are actively trying to destroy the Syrian government. They are actively trying to destroy the Yemeni government. They are actively trying to destroy the Iranian government. Most people say that Israel is invading 5 countries, but I think that's a myth. Those are only 4 countries that they're currently fighting against, because the Palestinians are not a country. They're not like in a war with Israel. They are Israel's slave population that Israel is currently exterminating. There's nothing that compares with this. There's nothing that's on this level. And if we enable, there's nothing on this level since the 1940s Germans. If we enable Israel to crush Iran, the only sort of resistance that's left in the region, they're already talking about moving on to Turkey. They're already talking about, Egypt's getting really scared, as they should be, even though Egypt has had an alliance with Israel for decades. This is horrifying. This is terrifying. This is a direct threat to U.S. empire and the United States. The United States sits on top of the world system. The United States benefits from stability. Now, crucially, the United States Congress does not benefit from stability because the United States Congress is primarily paid by weapons companies. And they don't want stability. That's why they love Israel so much, because it creates destruction. It creates problems. It creates things that we can bomb. The Syrian war and the production of the Islamic State being the biggest example over the past decade. But if we look at how World Wars I and II came about, it was because similar forces, military-industrial complexes, greedy rich guys like Cecil Rhodes, convinced the British Empire to do stupid things that was against its interest. And that is 100% what Israel's program of local conquest is right now. It is stupid stuff that is against the U.S. interest that appeals to some people in the United States because it allows us to sell bombs. It is deeply against U.S. interest. Israel is, of course, the greatest threat to U.S. empire right now. It is, of course, the greatest threat to the stability and peace that we need to maintain. This gets to, and I think we'll close with a question that folks have been asking me recently, is like, Rob, are we about to get into World War III? Is this it? Like, is this, is Trump going to drag us into war against Iran? And is China and Russia going to jump in? Is this it? Are we about to get nuked here in New York City? And I would say no, actually, because I don't believe that Russia or China are going to support Iran. I think they probably should, frankly. So no, I don't think we're in 1939. I don't think that, the Arab world, much like the Chinese for the First World War, who had basically been in World War III since the early 1930s because of Japanese aggression. Yes, the Arab world has been in World War III for quite some time now. But I think this is more 1936 or 1937. We've got a few more years before World War III. So no, I don't think that's actually going to happen, because China and Russia will not actually come in and defend Iran the way they should. Not defending Iran at this point is appeasement, is what it is the actual use of the 1938 Munich thing. So, and I guess to truly close, what should the United States do right now? Should the United States pile in and help Israel with this project? Help them turn the Middle East into more and more of a hellhole that will inevitably lead to a broader conflagration? Or should we act to contain Israel? There's a lot of the big question nowadays in U.S. foreign policy is, should we support Israel or should we not support Israel in this endeavor? I would go much further. I would say we should support Iran, frankly. We should stop enabling Israel's aggression by defending them from every missile that Iran shoots. We should stop sending Israel weapons, and we should support the Israeli bombing of it. Sorry, we should support the Iranian bombing of Israel until Israel agrees to return to its 2022 borders. We should support the Iranian bombing of Israel until they stop their genocide in Gaza, until they withdraw completely from Gaza, until they withdraw completely from the not much new territory they took in Lebanon, and stop their continued terror bombing of Lebanon, even though they nominally have a ceasefire. Should obviously force them to withdraw from the new territory that they are occupying in Syria. So yeah, we should support Iran in its bombing of Israel. Obviously, we're not going to do that. But we should, if we really wanted peace, if we really wanted U.S. empire to continue, that's what we would do. So I hope that was helpful. And I think everybody should take a closer look at what Israel is doing in Syria right now, because that should give you a sense of what Israel truly wants for the region, what Israel truly wants for the United States. And that is simply chaos and destruction that Israel can profit from to commit war crimes and invasion against a broader and broader sector of people. We need to stop supporting this. We might need to start fighting this. Thanks. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and please consider signing up for our Patreon. If you do, you get 2 patrons-only presentations every month and access to the patrons-only Discord server. Thanks.